RIP v2 by default has a feature called Auto Summary enabled. We saw before that R1 and R4 were advertising different subnets with the 10.0.0.0 Class A network. In the routing tables, these showed up with the correct subnet mask. Auto Summarization simply advertises classful networks instead of the individual subnets or component routes. This reduces the number of routes that have to be sent, and it reduces the size of the routing tables on the routers. Let's take a look at our next customer request. Ensure the loopback 0 interfaces on R1 and R4 are advertised via RIP v2 using the original subnet masks. All right, here we are on R1. The customer wants us to make sure that the loopback 0 interfaces on R1 and R4 are advertised using the original subnet masks. Here on R1, let's do a show IP interface brief, and we can see that the loopback here is 1111, and let's do a show interface loopback 0, and we see here that the subnet mask is actually a /32. So we need to make sure that RIP advertises this particular network with the correct /32 prefix. To advertise this via RIP, we go back to router RIP config here, and we type network 1.1.1.1. Now, if we do a show run section router RIP, we can see that the network statement has changed to 1000. So let's go to R4 to verify that we can now see this network in R4's routing table. We'll do a show IP route RIP, and look at that. We have 1000/8, and if we ping 1111, it works. But wait a minute, why doesn't this show up in the routing table as 1111/32 instead of 1000/8? Doesn't RIP v2 support variable length subnet masks? Yes, it does. And in fact, we know this because we see that 10.0.12.0/30, for example, learned from R1, shows up here as a classless subnet with the correct mask. Well, let's go back to R1. And here, we're going to go ahead and do a show IP protocols. And this shows us a little bit more information about RIP. Let's scroll down a bit here. Look here where it says automatic network summarization is in effect. What this means is that R1 is going to take the 1111/32 network, summarize it as 1000/8, and send it to R4. Now, let's go back to R4 and look at the IP routing table again. Let's do a show IP route RIP. Now, notice that the other 10.0 subnets are showing up with the original prefixes. Why don't these other networks get summarized? It doesn't make sense for R1 to send a summary for 10.000/8 to R4 when R4 already has a connected interface in that network. All right. Let's go ahead and advertise R4's loopback interface. We'll do router RIP, network 4.4.4.4, and let's go back to R1 and check the IP routing table. Show IP route RIP. And just as we'd expect, the 4.0.0.0/8 network is in the routing table on R1. And if we ping 4444, we can ping R4's loopback 0 interface as well. But we still haven't done what the customer has asked. The customer said the interfaces must be advertised using their original subnet masks, and clearly that's not happening. So what we need to do here is disable auto summarization, and we do that by going back to a router configuration mode, router RIP, and typing no auto-summary. And we're going to do the same thing on R4. Back here on R4, no auto-summary. Now, let's do a show IP route RIP. And now we have a route for both 1000/8 and 1111/32. This is actually normal because the router is simply holding on to the original summary route. We can manually clear this old route by typing clear IP route star. And then if we do another show IP route RIP, we can see that the summary route is gone. It's gone. By the way, the command clear IP route actually clears two things, the IP routing table and the forwarding information base, or FIB. What's the FIB? Well, if we type do show IP CEF, this is the FIB. It's a table of network prefixes, the next hop to reach each network, and the interface any packets destined for that network should be sent out of. The FIB is built using the information in the IP routing table, and it's actually what the router uses to make forwarding decisions. Now, if we do a show IP CEF 1111, we can see that the next hop to reach 1111 is through 10.0.14.1, R1, out of the gigabit 01 interface that faces R1. Okay, let's go back to R1 and do the same thing there. Back here on R1, we'll do a clear IP route star and then a show IP route RIP. And we have R4's loopback 0 address with the correct subnet mask. By the way, what if we want to manually summarize a network? Let's say we want R1 to manually summarize the entire 10.0.0.0/8 major network and send that summary to R4. Well, to do that, we could actually go to the interface that's connected to R4, which is interface gig 01. And we do IP summary-address RIP 10.0.0.0, and then the subnet mask for the /8 is 255.0.0.0. Now let's go over to R4, and if we do a show IP route RIP, we can see here that we now have a summary route for the 10 major network being learned from R1. Now, the customer did not specifically ask for this, so I'm going to go back to R1 and simply remove that statement that we just made. Hit the up arrow, put a no in front of it, hit enter, and I'm going to undo it just like that.